everyone, welcome back to the Improv TX Comedy Network. If this is your first time checking out the podcast network, we appreciate it. Please head over to your favorite podcast app, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, or iTunes, and give the Improv TX Comedy Network a like. And just a reminder, the Improv TX Comedy Network is live on YouTube with all your favorite comedians on the improv stage. All links can be found in the description. And with that, on to the podcast.
Take a journey back
And
join the pack at Black Dog Retro Arcade.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Black Dog Retro Arcade Podcast. This is Duck. I'm here with
Ethan
and
Jay.
And today we want to talk about something really fun that me and Jay were like big time in. So we're going retro this time. We're going back.
It's so sad that we can call it retro.
Oh dude, we're going back in the day.
At least it's something that's still around and still kicking.
I know. It's just that thing that you go through when you get older, when you're like, this will never be old. You know?
And now it's old.
And now it's like, oh, that's an old person thing now, and it's just
wait a minute, that makes me old. Oh no.
Oh dude.
Or it makes what we're talking about timeless.
There you go.
What we're going to talk about is Resident Evil. And you're kind of going, why did they do this around Christmas? Jay remembers this. The commercials for the Resident Evil 2 Christmas commercial where the kid picks up the Christmas package and there's a decapitated head in it. Do you remember that commercial?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually got a fun story about Resident Evil 2 about how I got it. My grandpa, must have been 73. Oh no, almost 73. He was like 72. And I was in that, teenager phase. Not that I didn't like my grandpa at all. Just, when you're a teenager, you always have time for all your friends. Like, you spend more time with your friends as a teen than I think you ever do. Because now that, like, once you hit your 30s, you look for excuses not to hang out with your friends. But your teens, that's prime hangout spot. So, like, he was, I guess, trying to bond with me, or, just try to stick in my life for whatever reason. And for my 17th birthday, he got me Resident Evil 2. He went to a KB Toys, and like, it's so funny. It's at a mall. He's like, "What would my grandson like?" And then they're like, "They must have been
there."
They must have been like, "How old is he?" And he's like, 17, and he must have been like, "Does he like video games?" How he likes all that bull. Or, sorry, we got to go PG on this.
Yeah, PG, man. I'll bleep it. It's fine.
Oh man.
Oh, good. He's gonna go back and bleep things.
Even for Resident Evil, we got to go PG. But anyway, he got it. And that was actually the first Resident Evil game I really kind of fell in love with. But I think today we're discussing the original, right?
We're talking about the first three.
Oh, the first three. Okay.
And possibly the fourth. We'll see.
Oof.
So, a little bit about our memories as you were talking about that. I was terrified of Resident Evil, and my cousin rented it from the video store one time when I was spending the night over at her house. And she put it on, and I hid behind the couch because I didn't want to see it. But then I realized I was the big kid there, so I had to be brave for the other kids. So they're like, "You play it. No, you play it. No, you play it. You play it." So I finally ended up playing it. And I got addicted. Resident Evil 2, I think, is a masterpiece. It might be a perfect game. But let's begin from the beginning with Resident Evil, also known as Biohazard in Japan.
It's one of the few times I really think that there's not many times I think we do something better than our neighbors to the east, but I would definitely put naming the game Resident Evil was one of them.
Yes, and the reason they changed the name was that it was a copyright issue.
Well, there's a band.
Yes, that's right. There's a band, and they were worried that they would get sued by the band and have to pay out royalties for the name. So,
I mean, are they any good?
Oh, yeah. Funny fact about the band, the lead singer, I can't think of his name, but for a long time, if he's not still, he was married to Tara Patrick. And anybody who's, a child of the 90s probably knows who that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're a pretty well-known band. They had I think their State of the Union address, I think, was their biggest album. Yeah, they were definitely right in there in that whole mix between, like, Pantera and all those other bands of the 90s. So, yeah, it was a pretty big deal, and they had the copyright.
I'm going to have to go listen to him after this cast. I've never heard of him.
We're going to listen to him right now.
Biohazard.
Wow, that sounded so good, Doc. And we totally just listened to it
Yes,
right
we
then.
did. Yes,
Now
we
We
did.
totally didn't just clip in the song for half a second.
That's what I'm talking about.
So Biohazard becomes Resident Evil because of an internal contest, a naming contest within Capcom, the company that made the game. And when they released it, it was a sleeper hit. It wasn't a huge hit right away. But people slowly started to find it. And it was so original, the fact that it created that atmosphere. That first game is creepy.
Well, there's debate with that.
Okay.
And what is that debate, Jay?
That it's wholly original. Actually, there's a Japanese movie called Sweet Home that came out in 1989, which was also given a NES release, which most people consider a massive inspiration for Resident Evil.
And it is, because it's the same person who made that game. They initially started by remaking Sweet Home. And Sweet Home is, you're stuck in a mansion, creepy things are coming to get you. It's kind of like a point-and-click kind of adventure game, is the way it works. So you go down a hallway, then you have choices. Do you want to, go down the hallway? Do you want to go back? And things like that. And then also you have the overhead view, kind of like Legend of Zelda, the original one. So you have both. But this game began as a remake of Sweet Home for the NES.
And Resident Evil was kind of where they started to double down on, like, it's a zombie game.
Resident Evil begins with zombies. And
I know it doesn't stay there for long.
It doesn't stay there. It progresses. The first one stays more with zombies than anything else, but you do get some other things coming at you. The dogs specifically. Do you remember the first time you walked into that hallway and those dogs popped through the window? Did you jump out of your pants? Excuse my language.
Yeah, did you jump out of your pants? Pardon his language.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we could definitely talk about, one of the things that Resident Evil games do is they're phenomenal with jump scares. I never understood the hate that people have for jump scares when it comes to horror movies. People call them cheap or blah, blah, blah. I think jump scares are a pillar of horror movies.
Absolutely.
I mean, the best horror movies I've ever seen, for me personally, always had amazing jump scares. But anyway, I digress. Yeah, when the first time the dogs jump through the window as you're going down that one hallway, it's definitely it hooks you. It hooks you, and even when you know it's coming, it still twitches you a little bit.
Oh, that glass breaking noise was like perfection, and that's the thing. This game, not only graphically at the time, was above and beyond anything else. It also sound, the music in the game, the atmosphere of the game, it just totally drew you in. From that first zombie chomping down on the guy, slow head turn till you can see the rotted face. It just, the story brings you in. Every time you open a door, too, the loading scene shows you opening the door. And that suspense it builds, because you don't know what's behind that door. And usually it's a zombie. And it's just so good.
It's kind of neat to see how that influenced other games. Like, immediately the door thing, I think of Luigi's Mansion. They pulled that from Resident Evil.
Yeah, 100%. And it's a cool little loading effect. And like I said, it builds tension. Everything in this game is about tension. As you progress through it, like, the enemies get harder. You have save rooms, but they're like in different parts of the mansion, and they're a little bit difficult to get to. There's going to be a barrage of enemies to get there. And the exploration, the back and forth, it's kind of a Metroidvania in 3D. The biggest complaint people have, though, about the game...
tank controls.
Tank controls.
See, again, that's another thing where people... I think that's a modern complaint, because...
Oh, it absolutely is.
You're complaining about something that was pretty revolutionary, at least at the time. The tank controls were what they were kind of based on.
How dare this old game not have modern control schemes?
Well, exactly. But I thought, really, for this game, I thought tank controls were really the way to go. I mean, just because of what you had to do and the way you had to interact and all those things by, moving different things on pressure plates and the way you had to move on a dime and all those things. It really worked. It's part of the DNA of the original Resident Evils.
I can see that.
You really can't have it without the tank controls, in my opinion. The originals, that is.
And the fun of the game also is in the characters. You've got Chris Redfield, you got Jill Valentine, you got Wesker, you've got Barry, you've got all these memorable cast members, and voice acted both horribly and wonderfully at times. I mean, it's a meme unto itself.
See, I don't even know if that was I don't even know if that was really on accident. I think it might have been on purpose. I mean, you look back in time at other classic games like Pro Wrestling for NES, it has a winner is you, and then there's another one where all your base are belong to us, and these things, those were like legitimate accidents that have since gone on to be in the vernacular of video games forever, and but to become a Jill sandwich is right up there. It's the number one thing people think about when they think about the voice dialogue of this game, and which is, sad for Barry because, he doesn't have a very long lifespan.
I mean, honestly, I think it endears the game to you. You know what I mean? It's just this campy adventure that you're going through. And that opening cutscene was revolutionary. At the beginning of Resident Evil,
it's awesome.
They showed, the action. And what's great is Wang on YouTube has went and tried to find the actors and stuff like that. He does like documentaries on like the voice actors, the actual actors that are in the cutscene at the beginning. What were you going to say, Jay?
No, nothing. I mean, you hit around the head. I think those they call them FMVs, but that's like they're straight up, movies. And granted, it wasn't necessarily the highest quality, but the fact that you got to see that.
Yeah, you see what leads up to them running into the mansion, and all beforehand, it's all live action.
And the only way they could have done that was on CD-ROM.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. That's why the PlayStation totally ran. And we get the Resident Evil 2. We'll talk about the conversion that happened between that and the Nintendo 64. But yeah, because of all the audio, you really needed a CD-ROM. You needed the Sony PlayStation. You needed that system. They also released it, I believe, on the Sega Saturn. We got to talk about, though, many, many years later, because I don't have the date, they ended up creating a remake for the GameCube.
Well, I mean, 6 years later.
It was but the graphical difference between that PlayStation era and GameCube is astronomical.
You're skipping a huge part.
What's that?
Well, for one thing, Resident Evil is the first game I've ever seen that had a director's cut.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And that was created to help push sales of Resident Evil 2 and build hype at the time. And it also had the DualShock support.
So what did they change in the director's cut? Just kind of made it link to 2?
It's really not nothing. I didn't see anything that was just amazingly different. But, the fact that it was called director's cut was very different for video games. First time I'd ever seen it. It did help, create a bridge to Resident Evil 2, which, quite frankly, I would also agree is absolutely a masterpiece.
It's a masterpiece. But before we get to Resident Evil 2, we got to talk about Resident Evil 1.5, the total cluster F of the series. And this has happened multiple times where Capcom will begin producing a game for Resident Evil, and it will be going okay, and then all of a sudden they just take a right turn. Resident Evil 4 had multiple prototypes that were completely different than the final build of the village. So with Resident Evil 1.5, the one thing that was the same was the police station, but the characters were different. They did have your hero,
that's my guy,
Leon Kennedy.
That's my dude.
But they also had another character. I can't remember her name, but she, instead of Claire Redfield, it was a girl who was wearing a red suit. And the tank controls were really difficult. They're really janky. And they didn't like the story. They didn't like where it was going. So they scrapped the entire thing and started from scratch. And that's why they released the director's cut, like I said, so that they could actually, the fans, because the game was building in momentum. People were hyped for Resident Evil 2.
They were buying themselves time with that release.
Well, yeah, they got George Romero to create the commercial.
Yes.
Really?
He was supposed to direct a movie, and I've actually read the script version of it. And he made some minor changes to the characters. But for the most part, other than the first dining room being covered in ivy is what he had in his thing, it wasn't a bad script. And it would have been a great action film. It would have been better than what we eventually got, I think. Yeah, he was supposed to direct a movie, but it just never came to fruition. So we get Resident Evil 1.5. It's crap. They start from scratch. And then finally, when it's released, January 21st, 1998, masterpiece.
Yeah, man.
What sets it apart for you?
Well, I mean, for one thing, I was much closer to the age of the protagonist. I always looked at Chris as, at least from the guy in the trailer, he looked like he was in his mid-30s. Leon Kennedy definitely looked very young. He was 21, and I was 17 at the time, and it was just really cool. And quite frankly, I think a lot of people would agree. You look at many top 10 lists of the best characters, and it's pretty much 1-2-2-1, 1-2-2-1 between him and Jill Valentine. Those are the two absolute backbones of the series. Sorry, Chris, but really at the end of the
that's
day,
why he keeps coming back in so many other Resident Evil games, right?
We'll just leave it at this. The two highest rated games are both Leon games.
Yeah, 2 and 4.
2 and 4. People will talk about the one that's called Biohazard, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, and people are even throwing in 8 a little bit into the mix, but, at the end of the day, it's all about Leon. 6 is the one game that he did that most people think is laughably bad, which ironically he shares billing with Chris Redfield.
Yeah.
So I think that, and he's younger, he's almost the audience, because he is a rookie cop coming into Raccoon City. All of this that we're experiencing for the first time, he is also experiencing for the first time, not just as the audience, but as a new cop, and his experience. I just feel like you feel a lot more immersed in it, and the proof's in the pudding. The police station from Resident Evil 2 is just, it's gorgeous.
It's iconic.
Oh, super iconic.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's based off, once again, a mansion or a castle. Like with the layout and how it's kind of so huge and labyrinthian, if that's even a word. But you didn't mention Leon's hair. He's got pure 90s hair.
Well, actually, I mean, honestly, most people will look at Leon's haircut from Resident Evil 2 and tell you it's a Karen cut.
It's totally.
He's actually more of a trendsetter than a trend getter if you really think about it. I think the only other person I remember back then that rocked that haircut was one of the members of Wilson Phillips. Not to date myself even further, but
what's their song? Hold on for one more day.
Okay.
Can you see these references flying over my head?
Absolutely. We're old, man. This is all our history.
We're the resident olds.
Basically, Leonardo DiCaprio, what he looked like in Titanic, it's kind of that cut. So, yeah, I love the opening FMV. I think it looks so real, and 98. It was ridiculous, and it's all CGI this time. The voice acting in the second game is so much better. Like, it's like perfection.
Well, they had more money, too, and they had a hit, so, I mean, it should, and that's the other thing. Saying that Resident Evil 2 is better than Resident Evil 1, that's not a knock against Resident Evil 1. I think that's how it should be. The second game should have been better than the first. The third game should have been better than the second.
Should have been.
But,
we'll get there.
It should be building up and getting better and better, so.
We'll get there. What's really great about this game is it was 2 discs. And disc 1 was Leon, disc 2 was Claire, I believe. And if you played through the A portion of Leon's game, you got to use your save state and then play through the B portion of Claire's game. And things would change throughout the game. Like certain items would be missing from a spot that you might have took. Storyline would change slightly. Now, they did this with the first game, too, because you could play as Chris or Jill. But in the second game, I always thought it was more well implemented because it really did change the game up. And you had to play that way to kind of get the full storyline. Very cool. The character of Ada Wong, she is also a huge staple of Resident Evil as Leon's nemesis / love interest. And what a wonderful femme fatale. She's just a great character.
We really glanced over this in the first game. We didn't mention this iconic character is Wesker.
Wesker, yes.
The
Wesker, villain.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that guy.
Yes.
That guy is, he's. Some would say he's damn near the Thanos of the Resident Evil franchise.
I was honestly surprised he wasn't the first, kind of, with Dead by Daylight, I was surprised he wasn't one of the first villains they added.
Oh, really?
From Resident Evil.
Oh, Wesker?
Yeah, because, I mean, he's in the game now as one of the killers you can play as, but who was it,
it was Nemesis.
Yeah, Nemesis was the first one.
Yep.
Really? They put Nemesis in before Mr. X or the Tyrant. That's interesting.
I was about to bring up Mr. X and the Tyrant, yes.
Well, I mean, again, the Tyrant's also the original final boss of Resident Evil 1. But then, he's the one holdover from Resident Evil 1 into Resident Evil 2, is the Tyrant.
And we didn't mention the fact that Claire is related to Chris, and she's there trying to find him.
Yeah, she's there trying to find her brother.
Yeah, so that storyline aspect and that connection to the first game is a wonderful continuation from a different perspective to be like, what happened to these people? What happened to this city? And like, just from the beginning of the game when you're in a fiery streetway and you run into the gun shop and the guy closes the door and then he gets ambushed.
Who are you? What are you doing here?
It's freaking perfection up until like you get to the police station and then it's built so much better than the first game in a different way. It just continues it so well. I highly suggest playing it. And like you said,
oh, yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I don't care how you play it. This could be a hot take.
Hot take.
I love the N64 version.
Ah, yes. The N64 version, the version that shouldn't exist.
But it does.
Yes.
It's Schrodinger's video game.
I was going to say, didn't they have to like massively compress the game to get it to fit on the cartridge?
Not too bad.
It looks good, but yes, they weren't sure if they could do it. I think it's a 64 megabyte cartridge.
Here's the kicker, though. You ready for this? It processes way faster than PlayStation.
Yeah, I mean, they've put in the doors because the doors need to be there because of the suspense.
Oh, and the FMVs is still in there.
Yeah, the FMV is still in there. Everything that was in the PlayStation version. And the problem with Nintendo was so kid-friendly, they didn't want to do edgy games.
Well,
and so they ended up...
That's not true with the N64.
Well, they brought in the Conker's Fur Day, Bad Fur Day. They brought in Resident Evil.
That's their bad boy system. If you really look back on Nintendo's kind of history... It
is, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
If you look back on Nintendo's history, the N64 is definitely where they took almost all of the chances. From the Birds of Prey looking controller, where you Star Trek fans out there, all the way to the game content. Yeah, man, like you said, they brought in Resident Evil for that. Some of my favorite wrestling games of all time were in that, and those games definitely had some pretty racy subplots as well. But yeah, I mean, and a lot of people count on the N64, but yeah, they definitely took some chances, and this was one of them.
Yeah.
How'd you feel about the remake of it? How does it stack up to the original?
I'll tell you this: it stacks up so well that I realized how old I am now. Like I'm just not very good at the remake. I've come to grips with the fact that a lot of modern gaming has passed me by, and that's okay. I still played it, and I still got through it, and I enjoyed it. For what it's worth, I can't like it as much as the original because I'm just not as good at it. But the one thing I was really upset with is that we were kind of hinting a little bit. We're talking about the GameCube version of Resident Evil. We can talk about that real quick. Is that Resident Evil got this amazing reboot on the GameCube, and it's one of the most beautiful games.
It's gorgeous.
You've ever seen in your life.
To the point where they haven't remade it. It's just the graphics are unbelievably good.
Yeah, but that's the thing is like, and then you're like, oh wow, they redid Resident Evil 1 like this. I'm like. And of course, all of us fans are like, well, if they did that for Resident Evil 1, just imagine how gorgeous Resident Evil 2 and 3 is going to look. And what did we get? Resident Evil 0. And then they did release Resident Evil 2 and 3 on GameCube, and they were just slight updates for the original cuts that came out on PlayStation 1.
But they were pretty much the exact same.
Pretty much the exact. It was so disappointing because it's like if any game deserved that kind of treatment, it would have been Resident Evil 2. Now we got it. 17 years later, we got it. So,
yeah.
and the updates. I mean, there's some like the fact that now when you meet up with the Tyrant, Mr. X. He is one with you for at least the first half of the game. Kind of frustrated me, but it also gave a whole new aspect of gameplay.
And one of the things I want to say about the GameCube remake of Resident Evil 1, the Crimson Heads.
Oh, yeah, Crimson Zombies, yeah.
Crimsons scared the crap out of me. And what that was you go through the game normally and kill the zombies, right? And they're slow paced. Give it a half hour to an hour, you come back. If they're still on the floor and they're covered in red blood, they would get up and chase you throughout the hallway and murder you immediately.
Do you remember?
Oh, crap.
Do you remember?
It was awesome.
Do you remember the first Crimson Zombie that you come across?
I freaked, dude.
So the way they did it, this was really genius. At least the first one I remember. Kind of the place where you kill the original zombie and then you go through that door again because you have to. That's the other thing. It's not an option. You have to. And you won't see the Crimson Zombie up front. You'll see it moving in a mirror. And you'll go, what was that? And then you'll see this little thing come around, and you're like, I'm immediately terrified. Oh, yeah, I'm still getting gooses. That was 20 years ago.
Yeah, and the big thing is you have to burn them while they're laying there.
Or you can blow their head off, too.
Yes, you could do that, but that game is just so good. And, I love the original, but, that is the premiere version.
Oh, yeah, it's I mean, again... The first Resident Evil game, let's just give it all the excuses that it really does deserve. It was the first. Other things are going to be better, and that's okay. But the remake was just unreal. How just it was. You saw that on the GameCube, and you were like, at the time, I probably thought it was the best looking game I'd ever seen in my life.
Yeah, and it's still gorgeous. The lighting effects in it, like I said, is beautiful. And what's interesting is Capcom made a deal with Nintendo to only release Resident Evil games on the GameCube. And the GameCube was such a kid-looking toy box of a thing. And all the games from Nintendo are bright and happy, and the third-party games are bright and happy. And then you pretty much just get Resident Evil on the GameCube. I can't think of any other game series what
was that psychological one on the GameCube?
Oh, freaking
Eternal
Darkness. Eternal
Yeah.
Darkness is amazing, and that is a second-party game created by Silicon Knights, and it had the insanity meter. And it was so much fun. You walk in a room, but your sanity, your green meter's gone, and you would just start shrinking or grow real big, or the room's flipped upside down.
Didn't it talk about wouldn't it talk to you about your memory card saves too?
Yes, it would reset the game, or Fox reset the game, where you would be like, "What the crap is going on?" At one point in the game, that is a cutscene where it starts from the beginning again, and then every time they come out of the hallucination, you're like, I'm losing my mind. So much fun. I played through all 3 campaigns of that game, and it's very Lovecraftian. And you know this, I'm not a fan of Lovecraft, but I really enjoyed that game.
Yeah.
So It was really cool.
Hey everyone, it's just Stuck jumping in to say thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. If you dig it, please head over to our website at improvtx.com, where you can check out our calendar for all the upcoming shows in Addison, Arlington, Houston, and San Antonio. And don't forget to follow our social media, all links in the description. And with that, back to the podcast.
Resident Evil 2, huge success. So Capcom starts working on a third game. And the third game is actually on a different system. It's being created for the Sega Dreamcast at the time. And so they were making an offshoot game for the PlayStation, and they realized, well, we kind of want to keep the trilogy on the PlayStation.
It's kind of like that. Guys at Capcom, from what I heard, wanted to hold off on releasing Resident Evil 3 for the PS2. And a lot of people blame the fact that they kind of had to rush it because, like, Sony wanted to go, no, we want to be able to say that we had 3 Resident Evil games for our original system. So it kind of got rushed.
So with the third game that came out, was a side quest. That's why the game is a little bit less than the second game. But you do get Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. And the big thing that happens in Nemesis is the Nemesis. He chases you. And it's annoying, and I hate that game. Like, he scares me. He pops into the scene, he goes, stars. And then he comes after you, and you never know when he's going to show up. And it adds a different level of suspense to the game to actually have, like, a Terminator-style character coming to get you. So you play as Jill Valentine. I think there's only one campaign on the third game, right?
Yeah, you do play as other characters. You get to play as Carlos, who's a mercenary. But, yeah, it's Jill's game. That was pretty cool. That was the best part for me, is that Jill does get to have a game, like, all to herself for the most part. But, yeah, it's just hindered by... Also, it does really feel like a glorified side mission to Resident Evil 2.
Yes.
It uses a lot of the police station. It does have a few things that are a little bit newer. They brought back the hunters from the original game. They have a few other ones like that, but, it's just not very inspiring.
And we didn't even talk about in Resident Evil 2, the big villain, not the big villain, but like the villain that really stole the show.
Oh, the liquor.
The liquor, yeah. The cutscene of seeing the liquor the first time when he turns over and he's this venomous type character and that big old tongue was terrifying.
See, again, being a huge comic book fan, as much as I love the liquor, it's just really hard not to see a massive Carnage ripoff.
Yeah.
You see that?
Oh, for sure.
Is.
Oh, it looks great, but it's definitely Carnage. And then I just remember, like, even though I was 17, I was like, oh, that was a little disappointing. And then you get the scene. The scene I'm referring to is you have to pick up one of the keys and you have to go into an interrogation room, and again, it's one of those things you have to do, and it asks you if you want to grab this key, and as soon as you do, jump scene. He smashes through the police glass, and first time I saw it, I'd probably jumped 3 feet in the air. and I've probably played the game 20, 30, 40 times since, and I'll still jump. I don't care how prepared I am.
The liquor is so much fun, and showing up in the movie was like a really cool nod to the game. Now, the movie we can talk about later. I'm not a huge fan of that franchise, but it does have its merits. But we'll get to that. Resident Evil 3, though, I don't have a lot to say about it because, like you said, it's kind of like a side mission, and it pales in comparison to what would have been Resident Evil 3, which is Code Veronica on the Dreamcast or Code Veronica X on PS2. And that game feels like the third part, and wow, what a good story it's got. It's about twins and evil, and one of them is transgender, and it's nuts with it. It's like the story is wild in the fourth game.
And not only that, but like, okay, so PS2 version, Code Veronica X, all well and good if you had that, but for me, I played it on the Dreamcast. And Resident Evil Code Veronica on the Dreamcast, I was one of the many kids who I had to wait a year to get a PS2. A side bit about the PS2, there's never been a system, I think, that has had quite the insanity that the PS2 did. And I'm including the PS5. I know it's 2 years later and people are still having a hard time getting it.
Even the Wii didn't, like, the craze for that didn't stack up to the PlayStation 2. That was
PS2 kind of like
insane.
It reminded me of the Cabbage Patch Kid days. And,
yeah.
And I'll tell you why. Because, like, you were literally in 2000 money, so 22 years ago, people were selling their PS2s that they just freshly got for like $1,500, $2,000 on eBay, and there were scams on eBay that I was told actually kind of helped change some of their terms because people got rich off of deceiving people, but there was nothing technically wrong with it, I guess. But anyway, so the PS2 was, that was a pipe dream. Now the upside of all this love for the PS2 was that Dreamcast was dying. Dreamcast was, when it initially
Rest in peace.
Yeah, when it was originally released, I think it was $299, $300, which was a lot. And then by the time PS2 came around, you could get a brand new mint Dreamcast with a pretty decent library of games for $50.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, didn't you walk into some store and you were practically picking up Dreamcast games for just dirt cheap?
And some of those are ridiculous gems now. Best Buy was just throwing these games away. I got a copy of Illbleed for like $4.99, and that game out of box, just the disc, I think goes for like $150.
Every time you tell that story, my jaw just keeps hitting the floor.
Yeah.
Like I'm still just
fire sales were a thing, man. They just put out these big bins, throw the stuff. Electronic Boutique used to do it all the time with their stuff. It was amazing.
The Dreamcast, I mean, it was an amazing system. The hardware was amazing. And so when you saw Code Veronica on that, you're like, oh, we have arrived.
Yeah.
We have arrived. Now, granted, I think what they did with Resident Evil 1 on the GameCube definitely surpassed it, but just the crispness and the way they smoothed out all the polygons for Code Veronica X and the story, it was just so much bigger. And even the FMVs in the beginning with Claire and, the helicopter, it's just like, wow. We are in it now.
Yeah, it's really cool. It takes place on like this prison island with a mansion in the middle of it. So you get the mansion, the classic mansion. And then the big thing was that it was no longer still frames for the shots. Like, because what's cool about Resident Evil is it would do those epic corners of the room. It almost felt like surveillance cameras whenever you're playing the game. In this game, the camera would actually move with you. So it was your first instance of that happening.
Not all the time.
Not all the time. It still was a lot of tank controls.
Kind of depended on the area, whether the camera was...
But epic. Like, the storytelling in it's so good. I really enjoyed Code Veronica.
So, was Code Veronica then supposed to be, like, Resident Evil 3? Like, was that in development at the same time?
It was in development at the same time as the side story that became Nemesis. So... Like Jay said, Sony came to them and said, hey, we want a trilogy on our system. Can you make this the third game? And they did. So, but Code Veronica is to be the true third in the series. So it kind of continues on. Like you said, if Nemesis is a side quest, Veronica is the actual storyline that happens.
Yeah, but at the same time, I always gave Resident Evil 3 its due. To me, I always looked at Code Veronica as the real 4.
Well, that could be it, except for we get to 4, and we'll just talk about it briefly. Yeah. Resident Evil 4 comes in and changes the game. And whenever it was released on GameCube, it was a mega hit. Leon Kennedy doing his thing back, fan favorite character. You know what I mean? And just, if you played Resident Evil 4, I'm wondering if you're
I haven't even touched Resident Evil 4.
Oh, man. It's so different because no longer are you dealing with zombies. You're dealing with Las Plagas.
Las Plagas, yeah.
Yeah, you're dealing with parasites. And the gameplay is so much different. It's close to a first-person shooter, but it's an overhead shooder.
Over the shoulder, yeah. It was extremely revolutionary. I don't think any other game had a chance.
Over the shoulder, kind of like along, Dead Space, that kind of thing?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, well, no, Dead Space took it from them.
Yeah. Okay, well, then...
Resident
flip
4.
that.
Dude,
but
Resident Evil 4 in 2005, it just absolutely decimated the competition.
It changed the game on how games were made, how presentation went, how combat went, you know what I mean? Like everything down the line. It was just so revolutionary. And the graphics were gorgeous for the system. It looks so real, dude, even to this day.
Yeah, and not only that, but there's other things that it did, like... it introduced a place to buy stuff.
Yeah. Oh,
what are you buying? What are you selling?
What do you need, stranger?
What do you need, stranger?
Yeah.
And then even the bad guys, like you got your new heir apparent to Wesker with Hauser, who's amazing, and like a lot of these characters, they're just one-offs. Like the Saddler never comes back, obviously, and the little guy, I forget his name.
Yeah.
And then and of course him, but then of course you get the return of Ada Wong.
Yep. And once again, is she friend or is she enemy? Is she frenemy? You don't know. You never know where she stands, and that's so much fun. And one of the other mechanics is having Ashley follow you. Those quests were so difficult because you have a character you have to escort, and this is kind of the beginning of the escort missions.
Worst first date ever.
Yeah, dude, it's rough. Keeping her alive is hard, but also the mobs, like sending hordes of enemies at you that you have to dispose of, especially in the village at the beginning.
The doctor.
What was the doctor?
The chainsaw guy.
Oh, is that what his name was?
It's like Dr. something. I wish I could tell you his name. But they basically took the look from Friday the 13th Part 2, where he's rocking the bag, which is also kind of a play on a movie that is, us being from Dallas, there's this legendary killer that happened on the Texas-Arkansas border of Texarkana. A lot of people don't understand that the reason it's called Texarkana is because it borders Texas and Arkansas. Now you know something. Very, very famous, pretty famous horror movie called The Town That Dreaded Sundown. And it's based on a true story about a killer who, killed some people amongst both sides. But that mask as well. So that bag, burlap sack bag, and of course he's got that iconic chainsaw. So he's a little amalgam of all those guys.
And what was so cool was they ended up turning that chainsaw, the yellow chainsaw, into a controller that you could actually buy for the game.
I've seen that. Yeah,
it's a pretty high priced peripheral if you can find it.
I can't even express how big Resident Evil 4 was.
Let's go even further. I think they introduced this actually in Code Veronica, but the biothermal look. So they have the character use the infrared scope because they had Las Plagas inside of them, and they saw. And they had that little shrill thing, and then they had that, and then the sniper. Oh, the sniper rifles, and just you can't even. It's just you every time you talk about Resident Evil 4, you talk about another thing it did. Oh, and probably one of my really favorite things that Resident Evil 4 did is they introduced the timing. The timing bits.
Oh yeah, they what are they called?
QuickTime events.
QuickTime events. Thank you, Ethan. Yeah,
you like those?
It was the first time I ever saw them. I know. Granted, I think plenty of games have used those as a crutch, but I think Resident Evil 4 uses them just enough.
It's hard to do, but I can appreciate that. If used well, they're awesome, and they add to the intensity of a moment.
Which they absolutely did.
That's awesome.
So, you got the Indiana Jones shoulder rolling down towards you, and you've got to hit the buttons, get out of the way. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. The game is, I didn't expect to talk about it this much, but it's so freaking good.
It's hard not to, man. It's everyone would tell you Resident Evil 2 was going to be, the greatest game ever until you see Resident Evil 4.
It's a masterpiece, too.
And then they remade Resident Evil 2, and they're like, well, it's still, right there. And then now that we hear that they're actually thinking about remaking Resident Evil 4, it's like, dude, how do you remake that game?
Yeah.
How do you make that game better?
Yeah, because in a lot of ways, it inspired these remakes of 3 and 2. The over-the-shoulder thing lasted, I think, for 3 games, Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then they kind of bring that back for the remake, too, of 2 and 3.
Yeah. It's
2's over the shoulder now.
It's the gold standard now for Resident Evil games.
Yeah, it just changed the game.
You know what they should do? They should go full-on GTA 1 and 2. Just do overhead for Resident Evil from right now. Just bird's eye.
Oh, that would be cool. Drone style.
Or gauntlet style.
Well, we got to talk about the movies real quick.
Do we really have to talk
that's the question.
Before we get into the movies, though, I do have one thing that I'm surprised we haven't touched on, and maybe this is just, a gap in my knowledge of Resident Evil. What about the tofu?
We kind of glossed over a lot of stuff, to be honest with you.
Tofu is easily, I think, one of the funniest parts of the entire game.
So the tofu...
Come on, man.
So there's a little bit of lore when it comes to tofu. I believe the story is a lot of Japanese players were somehow able to beat Resident Evil 1 with a knife. The entire game...
With a knife.
And if you've played that game, you realize that there are a lot of characters where a knife really won't do it. As a matter of fact, I have the Prima official strategy guide for Resident Evil 2. And one of the things they did for all the bosses and all the characters you come across, it had a little legend type thing where it showed you all the different weapons that you will come across in the game, and it tells you how many bullets, how many shotgun blasts, how many magnum shells, blah 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 blah. At the very very bottom right there would be the knife, and you get to towards the later stages, and even for some of the bigger bosses they said this, and then they showed the tyrant final form, and then it showed the knife, and it just simply said not likely. So I think that
I don't know. I see it as kind of one of those little side things that's just it's so ridiculous and stupid that it's a great reward for doing that kind of thing.
Sure, it really. And again, it's just he squeaks and does all that stuff
on par with what is it the steak you play as if you do all the stupid challenges in Skate 3. You're literally a T-bone steak riding a skateboard.
Yeah, with the Tofu, he was part of the Survivor portion of the game, which was the addition.
Two side games. You had him, and you also had Hunk. There's a few hacks and whatnot you could do, especially with the N64 version. There's like a god hack you could give yourself. It's really stupid.
Oh, jeez.
It's a god hack that gives you infinite ammo and infinite health. If you could look it up online. Yeah. But somehow it would break. It also broke the game to the point where you could give Tofu like weapons. So and Tofu just was the knife, but it's cool when you see Tofu with like a Gatling gun just rattling off.
That's awesome. Well, with the movies, for me, the first one I went to see in theaters, and Jay, I'm guessing you probably went to see it in theaters too.
Yep, I saw it at opening night.
Yeah, and it definitely did not deliver because it's so radically different. Introducing the character of Alice, who Mila Jovovich, she's a wonderful actress.
She's the face of that whole movie franchise,
and it's wonderful because her husband is the one who directed the movie.
She's the wife of the whole franchise. Yeah. Let's not get it twisted.
Yeah, and what you do is if you can separate from the games and look at it as its own entity, those movies are bonkers.
Well,
they're absolutely crazy.
But here's the thing. I would have appreciated it if they went so far into their own realm. And I think the first movie actually does it. I think the first movie really kind of stands on its own as a pretty original piece, aside from like the beginning and the end being in the mansion, but that's it. And I was like, okay, there's the mansion, there's the homage to the movie, now we're getting a movie that's all its own. And I was like, okay, well that's pretty cool. Because, like it or not, Resident Evil 4 absolutely stole that laser grid scene from the movie.
In the laser grid scene from the movie, have you seen it?
Mm-mm.
It's wonderful. It's a wonderful 5-minute scene where basically it's your basic booby trap kind of thing, but these lasers will cut the people, and the guy gets freaking tricked by the lasers, and he gets totally cubed by the lasers. And, and you see his eye split into a cube. It's cool, dude.
Yeah,
it's cool.
I'm gonna look that up real quick.
Yeah, so that part I thought was really cool. Well, this is where I think they kind of went off the rails, is they started using the games as kind of crutches.
Right, so the second movie
is Resident Evil 3.
Yeah, and it has Jill Valentine in it. Barely uses her as a character, and it has the Nemesis in it too. The third movie isn't bad. It's a whole new story, totally original. I enjoyed it for what it was, and then after that, they just become like weird action films, but like highly entertaining in a bad way. So
like it's just so cheesy and so off the wall ridiculous.
I mean, literally, she's being cloned, and there's multiple clones of her fighting, and it just becomes bat poop crazy.
I think it's one of the top 20 highest grossing franchises.
Absolutely.
It's $1 billion franchise.
Yes, it's made stupid money. And like I said, if you can separate it as an action film kind of thing, they're enjoyable. They really are. It's just knowing the games, we wanted something closer to the games, which we recently got with Return to Raccoon City, I think it's called.
Return to Raccoon City, but it's almost like a too little too late thing. The magic's kind of gone to get those movies back. But I think if you would have made a Resident Evil movie in 2002 when the original came out, if you'd have made one more like faithful to I think those could have been like real blockbusters.
Absolutely. And they also made a Netflix TV series that we're not going to talk about because evidently that was terrible. Jay, what's your favorite memory from Resident Evil playing it? Like, what's the one that sticks out to you and just like scares you or excites you or got you enthralled?
Well, it's you know what? It's probably the first game I remember really playing late at night. It's like the game I was playing at 2, 3, 4 in the morning in my late teens, and it's one of those games that I can go back to probably about once or twice every couple of years and just have fun, just being a kid again a little bit. It's absolutely nostalgic for me. It's a very much a game of accomplishment. I think that's one of the reasons it has such high replay value, is that it's not just a run and gun shooter, and this is something we didn't talk about at all yet, is it's not just a survival horror game, it's a puzzle game.
Yes,
it's a
big
massive
time.
Puzzle game.
Big time. And that's the one aspect of it I'd never enjoyed was the puzzles, but like there's such a huge portion of the game collecting crests and keys, like you said, or like items to open locked doors. Even just like trying to conserve your ammo as the game goes through, and your safe rooms with your boxes to put the different items in. And once you get the rocket launcher, game over. Just game over, man. Game over.
I'm really surprised the puzzle aspect didn't do anything for you, because the way you're describing it, it sounds almost, Metroidvania, Castlevania-esque, and
it is.
You dig that kind of stuff, as far as I know.
It is. I think that they're simple puzzles, so it's not a big deal, and there's a bunch of them. It reminds me of Zelda, more or less, like how there's little puzzles in Zelda and stuff like that. it's just one of those things where I never dug that side of it, but I think I was just always so scared that the zombies were going to bust in the room. And that's one of my favorite memories, is walking down the hallway in Resident Evil 2 towards the end of the police station and killing all those zombies, and then coming back up and they've climbed through the windows, and they do that cutscene where they climb through the windows. That scared the crap out of me.
Well, yeah, they will if you don't board them up.
You can board them up?
I thought you were going to talk about the jump scare you get later on when you're playing B-side, and you go through that one room and Mr. X explodes through it.
Mr. X, he's kind of like a proto-Nemesis, or Nemesis is the better Mr. X, or the worst, depending on how you view it. Mr. X would follow you through the game and just, oh man, like I said, that Terminator style, kind of putting a clock on what's going on, you know what I mean? Like, feeling of being chased. It's terrifying.
Applies that pressure, yeah.
And in the remake, they make it so much better because of the tapping, the footsteps. You know he's coming. And something they couldn't do with the earlier games because they didn't have the processing power. Just, back then you could only really have like one type of enemy on screen at one time. So you could have lickers or you could have zombies, but you couldn't have zombies and lickers. By the time you get to Resident Evil 2, the remake, you have zombies, lickers, and Mr. X at the same time. It's just nightmare fuel. Yeah,
that's crazy. And that's the thing that I love about these games, is they were nightmare fuel. I dreamt about zombies for a good 10 years, like every night. And occasionally I still have zombie nightmares. But these actually introduced me to horror films, because I was terrified of anything scary when I was younger, which is crazy to say because now I love horror films. But this game, being brave for those younger kids and actually playing it for the first time, led to me eventually watching Night of the Living Dead, which, has a lot of history for me because, it was filmed in Pennsylvania, about, a couple counties over from where I live, and watching that in the zombie aspect of it for the first time. And then I was like, well, if I can watch this, I can watch other stuff. And then I started watching scary movies. So Resident Evil in a lot of ways led me to my love of horror. And I think that's wonderful. I absolutely love the games. They have a special place in my heart. Going back, is it hard for you? Because, like, the tank controls are rough. I understand what they're saying. Like,
again, maybe it's just because I grew up with them. Like, I can adapt to them pretty well. I think if you didn't grow up with them, I can definitely see how they can be frustrating, especially when you have these newer games, like Resident Evil 4 and everything past that kind of got rid of it. But yeah, I don't think
you grew up on it, so it's almost like coming home to.
Yeah, it's coming home. And guess what? I'm sure there's something that's going on with games today that in 20 years everyone's going to think is just the dumbest thing ever.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, we just talked about the
QuickTime events.
Thank you, QuickTime events.
Yeah, God. super. Well, I mean, they actually weren't even that new back then, but nowadays you got like games like Asura's Wrath and other games like that, which are just nothing but QuickTime events.
Yeah, there's a point of overdoing it, and the industry's kind of figuring that out right now.
Absolutely. Well, Jay, Ethan, is there anything else you want to say about Resident Evil?
I have one thing. I watched the laser scene just now. Holy, you can bleep that if you want. Just holy.
It's freaking cool, isn't
it?
Dude. It's
that guy got
cool.
Sliced dice and oh my gosh.
He got cubed, man.
I'm not gonna lie, you got me wanting to go watch the movie now.
No, that's the good part.
Yeah,
it looks like a movie. I could sit down and just laugh at how cheesy it is. Like that, it looks fun.
The director is Paul W.S. Anderson, and a funny fact about him is that there's another movie he did right after this, which was Aliens vs. Predator, and that same actor, his name's Colin Salmon, he gets hit with a predator nets and gets the exact same thing.
He gets cubed.
Double cubed. Dang, double cubed. That's what we should call this podcast. Resident Evil Double Cubed.
Double cubed.
With that said, guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. This has been Duck. I've been here with
Ethan
and
Jay. Take a journey back and join the pack at Black Dog Retro Arcade.
All right, I don't have to do it. It's so much fun.
Showing the pack.
And there it is. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. If you enjoyed it, please head over to improvtx.com to check out all our upcoming shows at the Addison, Arlington, Houston, and San Antonio clubs. If you like this podcast, you might enjoy the other podcasts on the Improv TX Comedy Network. We have The Act Out. From open mics to the big stage, comedians tell us the story they've made, where I talk to comedians from all over and chat about their journey this far. Also, check out the Black Dog Retro Arcade podcast. Straight from the arcade, we talk about how our favorite games were made. That's right, we're talking all that video game goodness. And finally, we have Quacking Up, a storytelling podcast where we pick suggestions from a hat and tell stories based upon them. Once again, thank you so much for listening. Please check out our social media, all links in the description. And with that, we'll see you on the next one.